session today. I know you had a lot of choice, and we're very, very glad that you chose to join us. We're talking about something that we've titled 1 + 1 = 3. And the notion of this session really was born out of discussions we were having amongst ourselves about the fact that it really is, and I was just talking with Dave Wenegren about this, it's really difficult to change a system that's a complex system without a lot of partnerships and collaboration. And when we take a look at what we're doing in public sector, some of our public sector organizations are some of the largest and most complex organizations in the world. And from my time in government, what I noticed was that trying to make the change from the inside out really wasn't working very well. And trying to make the change, I also spent some time in the vendor community, trying to make the change from the outside in was like pushing really hard sometimes without the results we were looking for. So the whole concept of the session is that it really does take strong partnerships with different skill sets and a lot of diversity to be able to move the ball. So having set that stage, let me take a moment to just introduce myself and then briefly introduce the panel. We're going to keep that short because we'd like to get to their amazing stories really, really quickly, and I'm sure you feel the same. My name is Lena Trudeau. I'm with Amazon Web Services. I lead the global expansion and global programs portfolio for our public sector business. And I'm absolutely delighted to be here. This is my first symposium. To my left, we have Teesee Murray. Teesee is the VP of Infor. She's VP of CloudSuite. And she has a lot of experience working with customers all around the world, public and private sector, to be able to help them modernize. I'll also say Infor is a sponsor of a symposium and one of our premier partners globally. So we're really glad to have Teesee here. To Teesee's left is Hassan Adekoya. Hassan is the Director for Enterprise Geospatial Technology at New York City's Department of Transportation. And the city's Department of Transportation is bigger than some state departments of transportation. And it might be actually bigger than all of Canada's Department of Transportation, but I can say that, I'm from there. But Hassan is going to tell us about some of the really interesting things that they're doing at the NYC DOT to really make the transportation experience in New York much smoother for users of that system. To Hassan's left is Jennifer Gustetic. Jen is the Assistant Director for Open Innovation at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. And in that role, she's really responsible for scaling the use of open innovation approaches. And she's going to talk about her experience there. It's really, I think, a unique vantage point to work in a place like OSTP, where you have the ability to look across all of the federal agencies and see the great work that's going on there. And then finally, but certainly not least on the program, Jorge Estrada is CIO at the Center for American Progress. And George has been engaged in a change program and a modernization program there that's yielding some pretty interesting results, and I'm excited to hear his stories, and I hope you are as well. But I wanted to also point out, before we launch into questions, that we have the private sector community facing public sector organizations represented. We have state and federal levels of government represented, and we also have the non-for-profit aspect of our portfolio in public sector represented. And I think what we're going to see is interesting perspectives on how, from one position or the other, to make that change happen by collaborating across what is a pretty complex system. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to our speakers, and I'm going to start with Teesee and ask if you could just give us a little bit of a vignette of what you're trying to accomplish as you think about innovation and transformation and the work you're doing. If you could just set the context for what you're trying to achieve.
Sure. Well, thanks, Lena. So at Infor, we provide beautiful software that's purpose-built for public sector, nonprofits, and education. And we provide that as a cloud service. And what we've done is created a last-mile functionality within the software, so no customizations are needed. And what we're doing with a number of our customers at the government level is helping them transform the way they interact with their citizenry so that Infor focuses on the software side with our partner, AWS, who hosts all of our infrastructure. And that allows our government customers to focus on really improving their citizenry service levels. And so it's been a very exciting journey because through some of our collaborative tools, which we call Mingle, which allows for enterprise collaboration, similar to what Facebook does on social collaboration, it allows better workflow, better communication, and provides better information back to citizens. We're also doing a lot with nonprofits. And it's a very exciting time because they're recognizing, just like in the education sector, the need to modernize and to improve their service levels because they want to save money at the IT level and they want to be able to focus on their core expertise. So at all levels within government, nonprofits, and education, we're really helping our customer base achieve their more strategic goals and further the collaboration to provide a great experience for the citizens that they serve.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Teesee. Hassan, why don't you help the audience understand a little bit about what you guys are doing at New York City's Department of Transportation?
Okay, we'll do. New York City Department of Transportation is responsible for the safe and efficient movements of people and goods in the city. And additionally, we are charged with maintaining the infrastructure, so the bridges, tunnels, highways. So we also try to, encourage, sustainable modes of transportation, as well as, improving traffic mobility while reducing congestion. It's a lot of work. And we, knowing what our mission is from an agency or department perspective, from a technology perspective, we support all this, the missions of the department. And what we try to do from a mission perspective, from the technology side, is to highlight that any technology services that we offer, it needs to be provided cheaper, faster, and better with high customer satisfaction. So those are sort of some of that's our technology mission. And with respect to the things that we're trying to achieve from an innovation perspective, we are looking at providing services that, in not so many words, we don't have the luxury of unlimited resources like most organizations. So we try to leverage existing softwares like Infor. And because for a lot of the things that we do, we track a lot of assets, and we try to use cost solutions or cloud solutions, or solutions that allow us to be agile and quick to market. But additionally, in cases where we don't have the cloud solutions, we would then proceed to building this kind of solution. So from a government perspective, we have to make sure that we pay attention to the agility, the time to market, as well as the cost. So we can talk more about the innovation piece as we proceed.
Great. Thank you, Hassan. Thank you. Jen, I had the great fortune to work with OSTP quite a bit when I was at GSA before joining AWS, and so I'm really interested to hear Jen talk about what she's doing on the open innovation front.
Thanks. So I'm the Assistant Director for Open Innovation at OSTP on detail from NASA, where I was the Prizes and Challenges Program Executive there for several years. And let me try to put in kind of context why I'm speaking at a cloud conference with that job. So prizes and challenges are new tools for government to engage individual members of the public in solving problems that are particularly difficult for them, or ones where they think that engaging out of discipline perspectives might be beneficial to making progress against that problem. So an example there would be the challenges and prizes that we're doing in the open data, algorithm, visualization space. So working with vendors like Topcoder, Kaggle, Innocentive, a variety of different vendors that actually help us to tap into distributed networks of experts around the globe that work on these issue areas that just happen not to be employed by the federal government, or maybe not employed by one of the contractors that we already have on staff, and maybe not accessible through a grantee. So how is it that the US federal government can tap into individual ingenuity, entrepreneurs and startups in a way to kind of break through and solve problems that range from technology issues to scientific research issues to service provision issues and software development issues as well. Prizes and challenges offer an entirely new mechanism for the government to spend money and pay individuals directly to solve problems, which is pretty revolutionary for the government. I mean, the government only has like a couple handfuls of tools in their tool belt through contracts, through grants, different types of partnerships depending on what agency you're at. If you're a federal program manager, you may only have one or two tools. You think you only have one or two tools to solve your problem, and only one or two different types of people that you can deal with. And maybe contracting is your happy place because that's the only way that you really know how to spend money, because it's so hard to figure out a new way to work with folks outside of your agency and compete that work in a way where you're not going to end up on the front page of the Washington Post or in trouble. So they just stick to the same kind of processes that they're used to for solving problems, even if that tool might not be the best for reaching the types of people that they need to reach in order to solve the problem or parts of the problem that they're attempting to address. So while I was at NASA, we ran several challenges that were more on the open data, algorithm development, software development side of the spectrum of types of things that prizes and competitions can be used for, where we worked with AWS and other cloud providers on both data hosting as well as access to kind of computing resources to make it easier for the competitors in those challenges to actually access the information that they needed to compete, and potentially have the computing resources that they needed in order to be able to compete on some of the more complicated kind of prediction and algorithm type challenges. And so those resources really allow us to tap into more effectively those members of the public to solve problems. And I'll get into some examples later to make this a little bit more concrete, because it sounds a bit abstract, but we've made some really, really interesting scientific advancement breakthroughs, some really interesting software development breakthroughs at a fraction of the cost and a fraction at the time, and using these kind of crowdsourcing approaches to problem solving. So I can talk a bit more about that later. Last number for you that's a tweetable number is challenge.gov, which is the government's one-stop shop for all prizes and challenges in the federal government. It was launched 4 years ago out of GSA. Almost 5 years ago this fall, there's been nearly 400 prizes and challenges that have been run by the federal government in the last 5 years. So it's not something that agencies are just doing a one-off, check the box, run my open data competition, and then I'm done. They're figuring out how to actually incorporate these tools into their problem-solving methods for how they're approaching kind of solving their large programmatic issue areas. And over $100 million has been spent this way too. So it's also not like chump change that's being spent through prizes and challenges as well, ranging from t-shirt and pizza app competition to $20 million prize competition coming out of NIH and BARDA to try to develop new technologies to detect antimicrobial resistant bacteria on demand at point of care. So like very large ranges for the ways that these tools are being used.
That's great, Jen. Thank you. And so if you haven't been to challenge.gov before, I would really encourage you to check it out. And I also just have to say, coming from GSA, I've never heard procurement referred to as anyone's happy place before. But it's amazing. I can't wait to hear some of these stories. George, why don't you share with us what it's like to try and modernize a nonprofit organization, an association that has a lot of stakeholders. It must be pretty complex.
So 2015, I've been getting a lot more sleep than I did last year, right? Ever since we started moving all our infrastructure into AWS. The organization I work for, Center for American Progress, is a think tank. It's been around for about 14 years now. It was founded by John Podesta. And in its initial run, it pretty much operated like a startup. There was a lot of money. There was a lot of cash flowing in from donors, and we cover every issue from national security to economics, healthcare, LGBT, gun control. So we have a wide range of issues that we manage and address and write policy for. We also have a C4 branch to the organization that does a lot more advocacy news sites. And so in total, we have about 27 sites that we manage and maintain. And one of the challenges that I had when I started was that everything was in-house. We had 3 engineers, about 7 developers, we still do. But our engineers were pretty much single points of failure. They were managing all our websites from a co-location out in Virginia. And every time something went down, I mean, we were beholden to them until they could figure it out, right? This was frustrating a lot of the developers. And given that we're a nonprofit, our salary ranges are not as good as the private sector. So that's a challenge in and of itself to find someone. So we had one of our senior engineers went on to a better opportunity, and we couldn't replace him, and we had hardware failures. And last year was an absolute nightmare. The beginning of the year was horrific. And because of the kind of work that we do, if you had a situation like when Sandy Hook happened, we get these surges that just hit the site. So even if we're managing and maintaining the site and it's running and operating, something in the news could just tip it over, and then we're down for a couple hours until we figure it out. So what I did was we were looking already at AWS, and I decided that I was going to put my 2 lead developers on it. That was last April of 2014. They came with a proof of concept by July, and by December we moved all of our 27 sites over. And just to give you an example of the changes that we saw, that I've seen already in my staff, and I'll elaborate on that later on. On my way here this morning, I get a call from one of my developers, which we've now turned the whole team into a DevOps team. But I get a call from him, and he's telling me, hey, listen, I think we could save about $375 if we do this and tweak that with the econ team, because they're running all these analysis. But we're getting all this information, we could save like $375. That wasn't even part of the scope of conversation with these guys a year ago. Okay, they would never think about optimizing anything to save money. And then I got in, and one of my other developers comes in and shows me a graph, and he shows me how the CPU usage on our lead website dropped by 15% because he rolled out Elasticache last night. So, one of the things that we've done, and what it starts looking like, is that there's a lot of ownership being taken by the whole team. My engineers are sleeping better, and there's depth going on there. But I've also now have an environment, and I have a team that people want to work in. So, we have 2 openings, and everyone that we've interviewed is interested because of what we're doing with AWS, because they can't get that where they are now. So it's given me a little bit of an advantage in my industry to become a center of excellence for these people to really develop. And I know that we're going to lose them and go away, but now the plan is to have a revolving door where we get people that are coming in with a set of skills and then leaving out with a much higher set of skills. So.
What a great story. I really appreciate you sharing that. And that whole flywheel of talent concept is a good one. Just coming back to you for a second, George, I'm interested to hear you talk about before and after from a people perspective, because for the government folks in the room, and probably folks in just about any organization that has an IT shop that's managing some legacy stuff, you know that your folks are working on things that are lower value than they could be working on, and you could be moving them up that value chain and giving them more interesting things to do, but there's fear, right? So how was that true in your case, that there was sort of fear of shifting away from your previous strategy into the cloud, or did your folks really embrace it? How did you help them get there?
So I had a few folks that were fearful, and actually the gentleman that went on to other opportunities was the biggest challenge to moving to anything to the cloud. For him, the cloud was terrible, was insecure, it was everything bad. So there was fear there, but my advice to anyone looking at the cloud is that, first off, don't start looking at it as something where you're going to cut costs. If you start there, you're starting on the wrong foot, and everything's going to be going in different directions, because you first need to learn the environment, and then you could optimize. I mean, we're optimizing, like I said, daily now and getting better at it. But you should really look at it as it should be an intricate part of your strategy. I mean, why do you want to go there? Well, we wanted to go there because it was not practical to continue to have a co-location. We went from 4 racks to half a rack, right? We still have our shared drives that we're backing up out there, but 4 racks to half a rack. I don't have to worry about switches going out or routers going out, which happened last year. It had nothing to do with anything else, but it happens, right? But then there's, we hear the term transformative, right? The technology transformative, and it's getting to the point where it's almost like a cliche. But there's a flip side to that, which the technology doesn't only change the business aspect or how we do business, but it also actually changes us. It changes individuals. And what I've seen, and I just pointed it out in my last point, was I suddenly have developers that are thinking bottom line. Even though we're a nonprofit, they're thinking bottom line. They're thinking how to optimize. And they're thinking that because they know that down the road, if they want to go to another career, to the private sector, that's going to be valuable. And you know, the engineers, the architects, the folks that are going to make or get a better advantage on this are the people that could speak that language to the CFO, that could speak that language to the CIO. Okay, and when they're talking bottom line, and when they're telling you, when they now understand, for example, that they would have architected the whole environment very differently, knowing what they know now, so that it would have been optimized. That's huge. So the transformation is not just on business and how we do business, but it's also on individuals. And I think that anyone that's a leader in technology should focus on making sure that they reassure their staff that that's the whole end game here, right? You know, will you be relevant in 10 years? And if you're not, then you need to start thinking what else you're going to do.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Teesee, I'm going to throw it back over to you and ask, you know, maybe with a story, could you help us understand, when you work with customers in the public sector space, what are the sorts of things that make that collaboration successful in your view? What does that look like? What do you find is working? I think people in the audience would love to know.
Sure, and I think a huge part of it, just to follow on what George is saying, is the education phase. Because as Teresa said this morning, cloud is the new normal. It really is. The question is no longer, will you go to the cloud, but when? And there is a lot of hesitancy out there at all levels, in government and in education and the nonprofits, in terms of what is going to happen when we lose control, and will our jobs be lost? And so a key part of Infor's interaction with our nonprofits and government and education and healthcare customers is education. We go out, and it has evolved the relationship that we have, where we're not just a vendor of enterprise software, but we have a partnership, and we're building a value-added relationship. And so we have to talk to not just the IT departments, but also finance and the operation folks, and we educate them in terms of how our relationship will evolve and how their relationship internally is going to evolve, as well as their relationship with their customers that they serve. And it's an exciting transformation that typically starts with a lot of questions, some fears, some resistance, you know, in terms of, I'm not sure about this. But as we continue that education and that change management, people get excited because they understand that they can provide much more strategic value and much better constituency service. So for example, we work with one of the largest nonprofits that globally distributes healthcare products, and they moved to the Infor cloud. They did that because they knew they needed a better distribution system. They have over 9,000 people around the world. They needed to have a lot of different languages supported, but they also needed to know where their products were, and in times of disaster to be able to get there quickly. And in times of disaster, on-premises solutions sometimes aren't the best. And so moving to a cloud-based solution created fear within the IT organization, until they really realized, wow, this is actually the best personal thing that can happen to me, because they were able to transform and grow so that they are so much more marketable now, as well as more satisfied in their job. And it's also helping them on the ground deploy their emergency supplies much faster. At the government level, one of the things that's been exciting is, even for workers that aren't using personal collaborative tools such as Facebook or LinkedIn, they're using Infor's Mingle, which is business level or enterprise level collaboration. And what that enables them to do is its workflow, its communication, so that they can get back to customers faster. And what they've found is they're achieving the cost savings they wanted to get, which was typically why they started looking at a cloud-based solution, but their service levels have been increasing. And that's, I think, at the heart of all of this, is this transformation is delivering more value and better levels of service. So we analyze that for our customers and with our customers to make sure that it makes great business benefit for them to move to the cloud first, and then to help them realize that value.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Hassan, how about a story from you of a project that you've taken on in the Department of Transportation for New York City, and some thoughts on, as you've looked at that project become successful, what were kind of the contributing factors to making that the case?
For us, a lot of the system that we work on revolves around providing safety-related information to the public. So we used the cloud, especially for information dissemination, and one of the constraints to preventing us from doing that easily is the bureaucracy. We have very tight security in government. It's so secure, nobody can use it. So that's that's the idea. So it is great. Like, I'm sure if you have your personal identifiable information online, in a government system, you don't want it being leaked out. So, but for a lot of stuff that we do at New York City DOT, immediately as soon as you create a permit, it's instantly a open data. So there's nothing secretive about what we do. So. Being able to understand that, puts that in context that, with respect to the choices we have to make when it comes to technology deployments. So with respect to a story about a project that we just recently launched called Vision Zero View. Vision Zero is a policy by the Mayor of New York City about reducing traffic fatalities to zero, and it's all about the engineering improvements and education of the citizens of New York. And the mayor came in very high on public transparency and accountability, and immediately as soon as he got into government, he wanted a dashboard that shows the city's record when it comes to traffic fatalities, so how safe the city is. So we worked on a project called Vision Zero View that allows you to sort of analyze and summarize traffic fatalities and severe injuries. We add a dashboard, a map interface that kind of creates a heat map and tells you, these are the safe neighborhoods, these are not so safe neighborhoods when it comes to traffic. And it also shows you what the city is doing about it. So you can look in your community district and say that, okay, well, my community district has a lot of injuries and the city has not done anything about it. So you can use that as a calling card to the mayor and say, hey, when are you going to install new speed bumps? When are you going to install new traffic signals, or what are the engineering improvements you're going to be doing this year or next year? So, and again, the idea was, the transparency. And when we were building this system, we were looking at, we built it without the intention of going to the cloud, actually, and we had it on our on-premise data center. And once the development finished, we were ready to go live, and then somebody threw like a projected hourly visitors statistics at us, saying that they expect about 100,000 users concurrently during the first week of release, and instantly the whole room went quiet, going, that's not what, we never talked about this. And so the panic between the development teams, the hosting teams, and the blame game started. And as we were having this discussion, brainstorming, well, let's call it brainstorming, but it was really panic in the room, because again, this is a public-facing website. The risk of embarrassment is so huge. Mm-hmm. We immediately, as soon as we concluded our brainstorming session, the CTO said we're going to the cloud. So, but it wouldn't have been easy to say we're going to the cloud, because if it was the first time, then we have to clear the procurement hurdle, the governance hurdle, all that stuff. But we had done it before in the past. We fought those battles in the past. And we already had an Amazon instance. We've already worked out a agreement with our geospatial data visualization provider, Esri. And actually, Esri and Amazon has a strategic partnership. They've written a couple of best practices paper white paper and published it. So, and they are actually the only GIS software provider that will support their license in the Amazon cloud. So in that aspect, it's taking advantage of the earlier battles we've had and the brainstorming and discussion about the pricing models and procurement. We were able to go to the cloud and work on making sure that we take advantage of the elasticity of the cloud, so that when we went live, I wasn't even in the office. I was walking to the office and checking the Google Analytics on my phone, going, are we down? Are we down? And we're not down, So, and that shows you the confidence that you add to just making sure that you've configured all the rules, making sure that your web application performs as expected, and letting the system do its work. So, in that aspect, and I think that's where we feel that the cloud really we outsource all the risks. And we are not going to bring down our data center, which is doing agency critical business as well, because of one app. So, and that's one of our few, stories that I could share, with.
I'm really glad to hear that. It sounds like a really important capability to have in the hands of the citizens of New York. So, thanks for sharing that story, Jen. Out of OSTP, you are continually working with a broad group of stakeholders. If you just include the government agencies that you work with, when you start to factor in the broader ecosystem of vendors, partners, stakeholders, citizens that are part of the open innovation ecosystem, it gets pretty complex pretty quickly. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about an example of how you've been working across that ecosystem and the results it's been driving.
The beauty of open innovation tools is that they enable partnership in ways that some other tools don't. So for example, in 2010, Congress passed the America Competes Act, and that Competes Act included direct prize authority for all federal agencies, meaning all federal agencies now have the authority to conduct prize competitions. Before that, only a few did. NASA, DOE, DOD, and so you saw those folks like DARPA with their Autonomous Vehicle Grand Challenge and some of the more well-known kind of government prizes. Those were occurring because they had the legal authority to do them prior to 2010. In 2010, all federal agencies got the authority to do prizes and challenges. The beauty of the Competes Act is it also gives every federal agency the ability to partner to conduct prize competitions and to co-fund prize competitions with the private sector and with non-government entities. It's really hard for those of you guys that have worked on a number of these different tools to commingle funds on most types of work that the government does. I mean, the government accepting money from the Rockefeller Foundation to conduct a $2 million prize competition to get better architectural designs for rebuilding parts of the New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut region in the wake of Hurricane Sandy through a prize competition would never have been heard of prior to the authority provided in America Competes to actually partner with the nonprofit and private sector to conduct prizes that matter to all the parties. And so where I would say when we think about partnerships in this general area, and this is inclusive both of crowdsourcing and citizen science, which I haven't really talked much about, that I might touch a little bit on later, the partnership opportunity is very dependent on the problem you're trying to solve. So in this Hurricane Sandy example, there were a number of people that cared about more sustainable development and building public space that was more resilient to coastal flooding, because it's the future. They're going to deal with that a lot more. And so how do they get better proposals into the pipeline, the development pipeline that HUD spends billions of dollars in grants on every year to state and local entities? How do they actually get better proposals into the pipeline so that they're building more resiliently with coastal flooding in mind? They used an innovative partnership approach through a prize competition to work with the Rockefeller Foundation and other local philanthropic organizations to conduct that prize activity. Another example that's one of my favorites is NASA launched this thing called the Asteroid Grand Challenge 2 years ago, which is to find all asteroid threats to human populations and know what to do about them. I think we can all agree that's a good thing. None of us want to end up like the dinosaurs, right? But there's a lot of parts of that problem. Finding asteroids is hard scientifically. It's like finding black on black, looking out millions and millions of miles away through telescopes that it's easiest to find them if you're observing through heat, not through visible spectrum, because it's like trying to find something that's one shade lighter black, like millions of miles away, in order to find a moving object that could be an asteroid. It's a huge science challenge. And then the know what to do about them piece. So we have all these ground-based observatories, one of which is Catalina Sky Survey, that is a huge telescope that is scanning the night sky every night, looking for, basically taking 3 images of the night sky in the same place every night, looking for moving objects. Asteroids move, stars don't move, other things don't move. Asteroids move. They're moving, or that's how you find them, moving objects. And so you're looking for something that's moving in a static image in order to find asteroids. So Catalina Sky Survey has all of this imagery that is typically one of the places that scientists mine in order to find new asteroids. There's a huge false positive, though, in the algorithms that they use. That's not a visible, the scientist that's working that night isn't looking at every image trying to find these. They use algorithms to power what might be a moving object in this imagery, and then they send back scientists to verify. Like, was that a spent rocket stage from like a prior launch that's actually orbiting around the Earth that's a moving object? Because there are other things that move. Not all of them are asteroids. But so, long story short, Planetary Resources, which is a asteroid mining company. Yes, asteroid mining companies exist. They haven't mined yet, but that's their goal, to bring back valuable metals back to Earth, because they're in limited supply here. Planetary Resources partnered with NASA, Catalina Sky Survey, and Amazon through a web of partnerships to host the imagery, that Catalina Sky Survey imagery, in the cloud, and through a challenge approach, which offered about $70,000 worth of prizes total. Through a challenge approach, ran 2 sets of challenges. The first challenge was to develop a better algorithm to increase the detection rate while minimizing false positives within that particular data set, to just identify more asteroids better. And that algorithm challenge that offered up, I think, about 35K of that 70K, ended up increasing the detection rate, the positive detection rate, by 15% in the main belt of asteroids. Better than what, this is the standard that scientists have been using for decades to find asteroids. And the scientists did not think that general data scientists and coders out in the world that were not planetary scientists would be able to build a better algorithm, and they did, 15% better with $35,000 using the Topcoder platform. And then they took that algorithm and they integrated it into a software package that was downloadable on any Mac, any Windows, and Windows machine, in order to enable citizen scientists from around the globe to download new imagery as it became available and search using the new algorithms on their computers for new asteroids, and submit those new asteroids that they've identified to the Minor Planet Center, which is the place that coordinates all asteroid observations for the globe. It's basically like the first stage of identifying if there's a potentially hazardous one that we need to worry about 20, 30, 40 years from now. So really complex partnership there, where Planetary Resources gave some expertise, NASA paid for the prize purses, Topcoder negotiated the agreement with Amazon in addition with Planetary Resources, and we ended up getting a meaningful solution that would ultimately help in planetary defense against asteroids by taking a small part of a problem and working in partnership to try to do better, squeeze efficiency, and do better out of particular parts of a problem that we'd addressed the same way for 20 years.
That's awesome. That's such an inspiring story. As you talk about working through partners and broad ecosystems to get things done, Jen, can you also maybe share with us a challenge that you faced in doing that, maybe a lesson learned around that?
Yeah, I mean, especially for agencies that haven't had partnership authority before, they're used to just spending money through grants, through formula grants, or they're used to spending money kind of through traditional contracting mechanisms. It's really hard for their legal, their procurement, and their comm shop even. The comm shop too, because they don't know how to talk about it in a way that's like not gonna get them in trouble on the Hill, thinking that they're breaking some law, when in fact Congress passed the law that said that they could do it. But it's very hard for them to get their head around. You alluded to it as well, the bureaucratic hurdles that you go through, and just starting to get people talking the same language about not only what's allowable, but also the processes that you'll follow to make people start to feel comfortable with it, and that it's not just a fad or a one-off, but it's actually worth their time from a business perspective to think about using these tools. A lot of times it takes high-level kind of buy-in from someone at the top that's like, hey, I know this isn't your standard way of doing business, but you're gonna figure it out. in order to kind of start brokering those conversations with your procurement shops, your legal shops, and your comm shops. But it's hard because it's new. Like, it's not, I call it the happy place because people know how to do it, not because it's actually good, but because people understand the process. And the process could suck and be horrible and make no sense,
And
which
sometimes
is
it does.
9 times out of 10 the way that it is. But these tools offer entirely new process options, but that means you have to figure out how you put enough process into it to make the process people comfortable, while at the same time not over-constraining yourself in your experimentation so that you're like, you're putting process on top of your one innovation tool that you have, and squeezing the innovation out of the experimentation tool that you have.
That's great, thank you. I'm going to throw it over to the rest of the panel. Same question, just very quickly. Maybe one, a challenge that you see, building on what Jen said, and a lesson learned around it, and then we'll have a few minutes left for questions from the audience.
I can only talk about our experience, and in terms of challenges, I think, from a licensing perspective, some software company, if you don't read the fine print, won't support you in the cloud. So you just have to be very careful about that. And or if they will support you in the cloud, they'll have their own terms and agreements to that. So we learned that the hard way, and fix what we had done wrong. And but really, like some companies, they sort of limit you. Their old pricing and licensing model is all about the cores, how many cores you have on your server. So on the Amazon cloud, the old concept of cores is out of the window. You can have any cores you want. So, and it's not really a good approach it's not a good look for the software company. So you just have to keep that in mind.
Got it.
To make sure that while you're building out your solutions, build a partnership with the software companies that you may have it installed in your data center already, but just have that conversation so that you're not surprised in the cloud.
Thank you, Hassan.
So, Lena, I think in regard to lessons learned, one of the things that I've seen within government and education, healthcare, nonprofits, it just spans even private sector, is overcoming the status quo. Because there's that mentality of, well, if it's not broken, why fix it? And truly, the innovation and the transformation that the cloud delivers is exciting. And so one of the things that we've done with customers is what we call the art of the possible. And talk about how we can, through using cloud tools and leveraging the infinite elastic compute power that AWS provides, help them achieve their strategic mission better, faster, and cheaper. Because the better and faster and cheaper is really something AWS does, but there are 2 areas that we really help them focus on overcoming that concern about changing, and it is a wholesale change when you move to the cloud. And one of those areas is we have a big science team. We've created a dynamic science lab at MIT as part of Infor, and they're focused on using computer learning and predictive analytics to help answer some of the most pressing questions for the industries that we serve. And so our challenge to our customers is, bring us your hardest problems to solve, and let's put our data science team to helping you solve those. And so we embed some of that computer analytics in all of the cloud suites that we offer. The second is the user experience. We've got the millennials coming into the workplace in large numbers, and they are intolerant of using the old green screens and the systems that we have throughout government and nonprofits and education. And so what we've done at Infor is we've created an in-house design firm called Hook and Loop. It's 300 creatives at our New York City headquarters, and they're working with entities like New York City to create a new user interface to make it much more meaningful for citizenry to interface with their government and for them to get to the information faster. And this is not only exciting for the citizenry, but also for the millennials that are coming into the workforce. And that's pretty much anyone that's 35 and under. And they want that experience-driven workplace. So they want a consumer-grade experience like they have with their smartphones on their business systems. And that's one of the things that we are working with our customers to deliver. And it's exciting once they get that. But that transformation that's needed and the partnership that needs to be developed is a key aspect of that success. And so I think that's an important thing to look for in whoever you end up working with.
Thanks, Teesee. Yeah, you cannot underestimate the importance of design and usability. Thank you for highlighting that. George, any thoughts?
I think the lesson learned that I would take away and I would caution is managing the narrative. Success breeds confidence and enthusiasm, and you suddenly get a team that thinks they could do almost anything, and they promise almost anything. And so, you know, you gotta manage that. Yeah, we use Salesforce, we use 365, we use AWS, right? So they're variations of the cloud, right? So then managing up, you got to manage that narrative, right? Because, well, wait a minute, you know, iCloud got hacked. The cloud is not safe, right? I mean, suddenly you're like, and you're trying to break it down, like, no, that's not exactly what or how it happened or what we're doing. But you have to manage up and down in that direction. So I think that you got to be very pragmatic. You got to give them the tools and the environment to test and fail. But you also have to be careful that you don't end up, you know, breeding chaos monkeys in your team that suddenly are, you know, taking the site down because they didn't follow procedure. That happened, right? And the guy, he developed a procedure. You know, he said, don't do this, you know, and then he goes and does it thinking that it was okay and took the site down for an hour. So I think it's and the narrative is going to continue to change. And you definitely need to make sure that even if you're confident that it can be done, that we don't, you know, in our own, you know, biases, overpromise and then get caught in a situation where we're under-delivering. So.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I think we maybe have time for one or two quick questions, if there are any questions in the audience that you folks want to ask of the panel. Please.
Hi, panel. Good job. Tony Dione from AHIP. Given we're a health insurance association, a lot of security concerns, a lot of break-ins lately, and taking our company to the cloud, you know, they're reading everything in the New York Times and whatever. How do you educate and really work on your senior management team to subdue their fears about cloud as it comes to, you know, losing data, security, privacy, confidentiality? What did you do? What tools did you guys use to educate them to get them on board?
So for those in the back that didn't hear the question, it's a great question. How did members of the panel help their senior leaders and the management team get over this fear or manage the fear of security concerns around moving to the cloud?
So I can answer that because we work with hospitals, and almost 80% of all the hospitals in North America run on some Infor solutions, and they're adopting the Infor cloud, run at AWS, and the highest numbers possible. And so what we do, because security concern is of greatest importance to hospitals especially because it contains such confidential records and also the HIPAA compliance. And so one of the key aspects is an education session that includes all of the naysayers and anyone with a question, the CIO, the whole team, oftentimes it's the operations side, so that they can bring their questions and have them candidly asked and answered. And it's really a process that's several hours long in many cases. And it's something that we've built into every sales cycle that we do with our customers, because we know that if we don't answer all those questions and if they don't bring every potential concern, that we're not creating the partnership that's needed for success when they move to the cloud. And so part of the area that you can really build that confidence with your executive team is through the attestations and accreditations that AWS has provided. So you saw the list that Teresa had of all of the certifications that AWS maintains, but what's even more important is whoever you work with on top of that, because AWS has the world-leading infrastructure, but on top of that is the application layer, and that's something that most people don't realize is probably 75% of the security issue. And so making sure that you have your applications that are optimized to run in the cloud and optimized to run at AWS is the most significant component because it's the majority of the security risk. And so a lot of the data breaches that you see and that are so widely publicized, such as the iCloud photo hacking, that comes from consumer grade experiences. And what the vendors here at AWS provide, such as Infor, is we have a business grade. And so that includes encryption from end to end, either through a site-to-site VPN tunnel if it's a private cloud, or encryption if it's a multi-tenant. And so understanding what that means and that it is more secure than the big breaches is a key point. But the last thing I'll note is the education also should include that most of the most catastrophic data breaches you've heard of, like at Home Depot and at Target, have all been against on-premises solutions. And that is because hackers are inherently lazy, and they want to go for the lowest hanging, easiest, most vulnerable. And archaic systems on old hardware with old software are the most at risk and the easiest to hack into. And so security all around in the cloud is of greatest advantage.
Thanks, Teesee. Any other thoughts from other folks on the panel about how you managed that narrative with your management team?
I mean, I could jump in and, so the way we look at the cloud now is that it's not the cloud, it's our data center. So, you know, adopting that approach means that, you know, you don't look at it as an external entity, but the same, you have to develop IT policies around it. So, and we routinely run audits and also run security penetration testings against our application layer. It's not done by our staff, it's done independently. So that way, you know, there's a, you know, it's not like, you know, if it's done by our team, then there's an appearance that we may try to hide, you know, something. And we don't want to do that either, because we want to know what we are vulnerable against. So we routinely run this vulnerability testing and penetration testing frequently, so that way, you know, as things are changing, the underlying infrastructure change, the software itself change, we can ensure that we are routinely we are secured. And those are tools that you can use to you know, educate upper management, you know, in your organization that you're doing all the best you can. Solutioning as well, you know, we make sure that we routinely engage somebody from AWS about when we're building a system to just talk about the solution architecture that we've developed, so that way they can also give us feedback and let us know that you're on the right path, at least from an infrastructure perspective. You know, what you do with your application is up to you. So, but you know, we make sure we get independent validation from all levels, you know, from the infrastructure, from the application, so that way there's a sense of at least if you're doing the best things that could be done about at this time, and it changed tomorrow, you know, then you know you're not as vulnerable as if you never had done anything. So,
Thank you.
I would add that, you know, it's narrative, it's managing up. One of the things that I did is, because my senior management doesn't have the time, half the time, is I send them, there's about 6 or 7 people on a list that I send. I send a summary of what happened in the last 4 weeks when it comes to security, how it relates to us, how it's relevant, what actually happened, what actually didn't happen. And I engage them pretty much. I come from the private sector. I used to work at USA Today years ago, and you know, sales was important. So what I've done is I've flipped it over, and security is the sales, right? And if you're a tech leader, you should be looking at it that way. You need to control that dialogue. You need to be proactive. Nobody should be coming to you asking or saying, hey, this happened over there, and we're there too, right? Because it's going to happen. I mean, there are situations where the cloud is not secure, right? Because if somebody compromises my credentials, they got the keys to the kingdom, right? So I have to be proactive about that. You need to manage it. You go straight to them with summaries of like, this is what happened, this is why we're safe, this is why we're not safe. And then you